Thank you for having me here this evening. We're not going to be talking about chickens in the backyard or sewers or traffic. Today we're going to be talking about public health and perhaps the most powerful evidence-based public health prevention policy that we have available to us today, and that is raising the age to 21 for all nicotine and tobacco products. Now, I was here perhaps 11 years ago, and I brought you another novel idea, and that was to make all public places, workplaces, schools, bars, restaurants completely smoke-free. At the time, that was a heavy lift for all of you, but you undertook a leadership stance in this community, and that spread to many other communities across Central Ohio. And in fact, because of your leadership, the entire state of Ohio is now entirely smoke-free. If you think about that cultural change, can you imagine now going into a restaurant and having your kid sit next to a smoker? Can you imagine coming home from watching a game in the bar and smelling like an old dead cigar? Probably not. Seems amazing. That same cultural shift is available for our kids today in terms of a preventive message that we established with age 21. Today we're going to talk about several things. First, what we expect of you and why this works, and why now. We're talking about why it works in this community and why you should encompass this with your policies. Why does it work? And what exactly we're expecting you to consider as we move forward. I'm Rob Crane. I'm a family doctor. I teach at Ohio State. I'm a professor. But my main job really has been to work on public health, and specifically tobacco, over the last 2 decades. I'll help you look with me at this particular very innovative procedural and policy issue. Unfortunately, we can't talk about tobacco unless we talk about death. Death is, of course, ubiquitous with tobacco. 50 years ago, we learned from the Surgeon General that smoking cigarettes caused addiction, heart disease, cancer. Now, 50 years later, we still have over 500,000, that's 500,000 Americans, smoking and dying every single year. That's the same as 3 747s crashing and burning every single day. But it's not, of course, just about death. It's about all the people that are here and alive now and have families who are dealing with issues around tobacco. We sometimes forget the myriad number of problems that come from smoking. And it's not even just death, but of course, the whole panoply of things that come along with dying and being ill. With 500,000 deaths each year, there are also 20 million Americans who are chronically ill with some sort of tobacco-related disease. So now we'll switch our attention a little bit from adults, death, and illness to prevention, and specifically our kids. This is from the CDC, not just us. It talks about 5.6 million kids and the fate that awaits them if we don't do something different.
In the past 50 years, we've made a lot of progress in smoking prevention. But if we don't do more, 1 out of every 13 children alive today will die early from smoking. That's 5.6 million precious lives we can save. Together, we can make the next generation tobacco-free.
Part of this is the why now. In 2009, the United States Congress finally undertook to regulate cigarettes. And they gave the power of that regulation to the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. We argued at the time, those of us in public health, that the FDA should be given the power to increase the age. But the tobacco companies fought tooth and nail to avoid that, and they were successful. We did, however, get a consolation prize. The FDA was required by Congress to write an extensive report about the possibilities and the projections that would happen if the age was raised indeed to 21. Finally, now 6 years later, the FDA has produced that document. It's 336 pages long, and it's titled The Public Health Implications of Raising the Minimum Age of Legal Access to Tobacco Products. It is a tome. I'm not sure many people have read it, But inside are some amazing statistics. The FDA projects that 4.2 million years of lives would be saved just in kids alive today. There would be a 25% drop in youth initiation, and we think this is a conservative number. Overall, across the population, there'd be a 12% drop in smoking and prevalence of tobacco products. Most interestingly, right away, there'd be a 12% drop in prematurity because of less smoking among pregnant women. And finally, a 16% drop in sudden infant death syndrome because of exposure to smoke after birth. This report was just published in March of this year, and already the profound findings are reverberating through the public health and legislative community. So much so that in the last 2 years, and especially in the last 6 months, over 90 cities in 7 states covering nearly 14 million people have raised their sales age to age 21. In fact, just a month ago, the state of Hawaii finally passed their age 21 law throughout the entirety of the state. So let's switch now back to Ohio. And this is true for any state, not just Ohio. But I'd like you to think back about how many folks, underage smokers, there might be. What's the prevalence of underage smoking in Ohio? Any use of tobacco? Anybody have an idea? It's an astonishing 27%. That is more than 1 in every 4 kids is using a tobacco product, at least in the last month. What's really most concerning about this is that this particular measure does not count electronic cigarettes or hookah use or vaping. That's where the major increase among youth usage of nicotine has begun. Why is it important? For adults, it may be the tars and the carbon monoxide which affects their lung function, heart disease, and cancer. But for kids, the issue is entirely nicotine. Nicotine is the only drug we know of that has a named receptor for it in the brain. It has such a potent influence on dopamine use, the main neurotransmitter in the brain, that kids who smoke, especially early, have changes, neurobiologic changes in their brain which last for a long, long time. What's that mean to them? Changes their behavior. For kids who are smoking early, it's their first illicit drug and a gateway to others. Kids who smoke are 3 times more likely to use alcohol, 8 times more likely to use marijuana, and 22 times more likely to smoke cocaine. More importantly, it has other behaviors as well. The usual things which elevate dopamine in the brain and make you feel good, like food, drink, exercise, pleasure of others in company, even sex. Those things are diminished in their importance because the receptors are turned down by chronic use of nicotine. In fact, kids who smoke early have much higher dropout rates. They're more likely to experience teen pregnancy. And most importantly, the earlier they start smoking, the heavier smokers they become. Let's move away from just talking about kids and talk about pregnant women and their offspring. We know the reproductive outcomes for cigarette smoking are bad. In fact, everybody who's pregnant and their mates and their families know this, but it doesn't seem to change behavior because nicotine is so addictive. So in Ohio, about 17 to 18% of women smoke during their pregnancy. And you can see the outcomes. Not only is fertility affected, but also miscarriage, ectopic pregnancy, placenta problems, low birth weight, prematurity, stillbirth, sudden infant death syndrome, and poor lung development. In fact, in some offspring, there's substantial evidence of behavior change long after the pregnancy. Smoking in pregnancy, in fact, doubles infant mortality. Let's talk a moment about our own community. Franklin County, as you're aware, has a substantial infant mortality crisis because we're 50% of the national rates. More importantly, perhaps, the disparity between blacks and whites shows that black babies die at a rate 2.5 times that of white babies. Our pregnancy smoking rate is twice the national average, and in Franklin County, women between age 18 and 21 smoke at twice the rate of their counterparts. I want to pause briefly here and talk about one other issue which is really confronting our kids, and that is that of e-cigarettes. I'm showing you a picture now of the very basic components of an e-cigarette. As you're already probably aware, E-cigarettes are simply a vehicle by which liquid nicotine is heated and then inhaled. Now, you'd think this might be better than a regular cigarette, but the data is not showing that. If you look at the benefits and risks, we hope that some people might switch away from regular cigarettes, combustible cigarettes, or reduce their usage. The data currently suggests that people are smoking both e-cigarettes and combustible cigarettes rather than quitting entirely. More importantly, it does tend to renormalize smoking in public. And of course, the thing we worry about the most is that it tends to be a nicotine starter kit for our kids. I often use the methadone analogy. We've shown that methadone actually helps reduce heroin use and the attendant societal and personal ills that come from it. But the question you must ask yourself is, should our kids be aggressively marketed this form of methadone before they start smoking regular cigarettes? I've been around long enough to remember the other innovations in smoking. After the Surgeon General's report came out and people were more aware of the health consequences of smoking, the tobacco companies undertook a couple of changes. The first was the invention of the filter. Do you remember the Kent micronite filter, activated charcoal? In fact, it's supposed to take all the bad particulates out and allow only the flavor, i.e. the nicotine. In fact, it did just the opposite. It made people inhale more deeply to get past the filter, to get more nicotine deeply into their lungs and cause more damage. The same was true for low tar cigarettes. And now, of course, we have e-cigarettes, hookah, and vaping, all of which look to be another game of whack-a-mole with the tobacco industry trying to stay ahead of regulation. Let's change gears for a moment and talk about another troublesome drug, and that, of course, is alcohol. After the Vietnam War, where 18-year-olds were sent off to fight who couldn't vote, there came the 26th Amendment to the Constitution, which lowered the age to vote. Alcohol companies thought this was an excellent opportunity to try to persuade legislators across the country to lower the drinking age. Made sense. Old enough to fight, old enough to drink. Well, the result was that 26 different states lowered their drinking age to 18. There was an almost immediate and palpable effect of a conflagration on the highways. So much so that, in the end, the champion of states' rights, Ronald Reagan, persuaded Congress to pressure the states that had lowered their age to 18 to raise it back to 21 under the threat of losing a fairly substantial portion of their highway traffic safety money. And in fact, all states did that over a period of about 6 years. You can see what happened in this chart. As the states began to raise their ages, prevalence of high school drinking came down, and not just a little bit, but dramatically. High school seniors who drank at least once in the last 30 days dropped 38%. And the kids who drank every day dropped more than 50%. Clearly, it had an impact that lasted not only for this generation, but kids who were in this cohort now drink much less than kids who grew up drinking at age 18. Switch gears again, I want to talk to you about a small town on the outskirts of Boston, Needham, Massachusetts. As you can see, it's an old online suburb of Boston, and they did something very extraordinary. In 2004, they decided to raise their age to 21. I actually testified in favor of that ordinance. The interesting thing was I thought it would happen to other cities around Boston. We'd have perhaps a test case. But in fact, only Needham went to 21. And as you can see, they're surrounded by 6 or 7 other communities pressed tightly on their borders. And Needham itself is only 2 miles wide. I thought certainly kids would ride their bicycles to outside suburbs to buy cigarettes. But that is not what happened. This indeed is what happened. You can see the 2 bars we have here. The top one are the surrounding 20 suburbs in the Metro West Coalition. And they had a little drop in their cigarette smoking. But look at Needham, the green line. They dropped their 30-day prevalence by 50%. And kids who smoked regularly, which is more like the habits that adults engage in, dropped by over 65%. That drop was 3 times the rate of communities around Needham. And I think gave us the first inkling that even in a community which was tightly surrounded geographically by other communities, there was a cultural change that made it more difficult for kids to smoke. Here's part of the why. What we've now come to realize is that the purveyors of cigarettes to underage kids are themselves under 21. In fact, 90% of those who give cigarettes to kids under 18 are between the ages of 18 and 21, where they've bought cigarettes legally. Kind of an interesting factoid of that is that of the sales of all cigarettes nationwide, only 2% go to kids between 18 and 21. The bottom line is that 2%, which is sold legally to kids 18 to 21, drives 90% of addiction in kids under the age of 17. I put this up as a slide all by itself to remind you that 95% of smokers start before the age of 21. Why is that? I think we all know the reason. No one in their right mind who's mature enough thinks smoking is a good idea. Even smokers wish they'd never started. So once that neurobiological change has happened in the brain, we call maturity, people are much less likely to take up the habit. The obverse of that, of course, is that only 5% of smokers will start smoking after age 21. You will hear a lot of people talk about their opposition to age 21 for cigarettes. Mostly it's based on the idea that age 18 is the age of adulthood. That we've chosen 18 to vote, to hold office, and to do a variety of other adult tasks like sign a contract. But if you look at the panoply of nuanced approach to ages and responsibilities and rights, you'll see it runs a gamut from 14 to 35. And all of them in between are based on our best judgment as a society as to when kids are ready to undertake the responsibility of making that choice. Many people will tell you that old enough to fight in the military should enable anybody to smoke a cigarette. But in fact, equating service to one's country and addiction to a deadly device doesn't seem to equate in my mind. I wonder if it does in yours. Many people have said to me, perhaps we should raise the age to fight for your country to age 20 when we'd have less wars. I won't go on with that one, but perhaps it's a worthy thought. In any case, looking at casino gambling, alcoholic beverages, purchase a handgun, concealed carry, foster a child, they're all set at 21 and they're set there for a reason. Kids need that maturity to make an informed and important choice. As we ask you to go forward, we'd like you to look at several policy and legislative choices. If you're going to write something about age 21, please include the rationale with a strong preamble. Because e-cigarettes become such an issue, you're required, if you're going to do this, to have a comprehensive definition of e-cigarettes and all nicotine delivery devices. We've asked people to focus less on the kids buying than on the adults selling. So most of your focus in terms of enforcement should be on the vendors, not on the kids, which are in some fashion a victim. Finally, without enforcement, no law really works, especially this one. So licensing or penalties that make people think twice before selling to kids make all the difference in the world. We've sent you the ordinances for our localities of Upper Arlington and Bexley, and of course there are many others across the country. I'm always reminded at this point in the presentation that the human brain, when turned sideways, looks a great deal like a question mark. Any questions? So finally, I want to leave you with this one kind of brief summary of the points we've made today. Hopefully we'll give you pause and energize your counsel and you personally to make the difference for our kids and their health. Thank you.
It seems crazy to have one thing kill 500,000 Americans each year, every year, and we seem powerless to stop it. That's the same as 3 fully loaded 747s crashing and burning with all aboard killed every single day. The CDC says 5.6 million kids alive today will get addicted and die prematurely from smoking. For decades, our kids have been targeted by tobacco predators. And now, celebrities are shilling that very same addiction with sex and candy. They want another generation, but we can make a difference. You can make a difference. Raising the sales age for tobacco to 21 dropped youth smoking by 50%. Who's taken action? Over 90 cities in 8 states. The nicotine industry owns your state house and owns our Congress, but they have trouble buying your city council. Trust your neighbors. Think strategically. Act locally.